In this overview, we're going to talk about group and ungroup. And actually, we're going to move on to talking about combining objects as well. Now, grouping and ungrouping are just fundamental corel skills, and let's dive deep and talk about what those mean. So what I'm going to do now is just draw some basic shapes here. I'll draw a few different shapes. Now, these are all independent, meaning these are ungrouped. These are separate objects, so I can control one object at a time. Now, if I want to make a global change to all of these objects, we'd want to group those together, make them one group. So the easiest way to do that is to select all the objects on your workspace. There's two ways to do that. We can marquee select, which is just left mouse clicking in space and pretending that our pick tool is now a lasso, and we can go and draw an imaginary box or lasso over all the objects that we have on our workspace, and that will select all of those. The other thing that we can do is we can double click our pick tool. So I'm going to double click the pick tool, and that will select all the objects on our workspace. Now, two really quick shortcuts. Control G is the group command. That means all of these objects now are in one group. So if I click on any of these five circles rather, the entire circles will be grouped. They're one cluster. That means I can control the color at one time. So notice if I click on a color, those will all change in tandem. I can control outlines in tandem, and I can size these in proportion. So notice if I left mouse click on one of those control points, I can constrain and control the size of all of those universally. Now sometimes it's important to get access to an individual element. In that case, you're going to want to ungroup. Now I should point out, because CorelDRAW is generally sensitive to whatever you happen to be doing in terms of designing, notice where my mouse is hovering, we have the ungroup little button, and we have the ungroup all button. So what that means is you can either click one of these buttons to control group and ungroup, or you can use shortcuts. And I, of course, always advocate that you try to use shortcuts because it will really speed up your workflow. So in that case, if I hit Control U, which is ungroup, that means I can now have access to an individual element. So I can control the color, the size of that element, because these are all now independent objects. So all I'll do now is go back and group these again by hitting Control G, and we have the same abilities to skew these in tandem or universally, and control it as one cluster or one group. Now I want to talk about another tool that oftentimes gets sort of misconfused, and that's the combine function. And really what the combine function is really just a super group. It's kind of a permanent group, but basically when you hit Control L for combine, that's going to take all the objects you have on your workspace and make it one super group. And generally that can't be undone because it's really just one solid object, not a collection of objects bound together. So notice when I hit Control L on my keyboard, we have the ability to combine these objects together. So that's fused as one, so they've adopted the same color. If I reorder the color, those are all one object. Now once something has been combined, notice my workspace here, I don't have the option for group and ungroup because those are now permanently fused together as one object. This might as well be one circle. Now in the event that you actually combine something together, you may need to make some changes here to get access to individual objects. And the easiest way to do that is to go to the arrange function and break your curve apart. Because this is now one object, we can break that object apart by selecting break curve apart. Notice how we can now undo that combine function if we break apart the curve. Now where this really becomes very important is especially when working with text. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to type out some text on the workspace here. We'll type out corel. And what I'm going to do now is change the size of that, and we'll go to arrange, and we'll say convert to curves, which is taking text from an active font into just shapes. So no longer can I change the style of text or any of the font properties. This is just a graphic. And what I'll do now is I'll say break curve apart. Notice when you break a curve apart, especially with text, notice how it changed the O and the R. Now those elements are still there, so if I go to view wireframe, I still have those elements, but the fact that we broke things apart kind of distorted the way they're presented, what we would need to do is go back and combine some of those objects. So here's another important way to use the combine function. I'm going to go and marquee select just the O and hit Control L, and that's going to reestablish and bond those two objects together. Once again, select the R, hit Control L, and I'm going to fuse those two objects together. So as you can see, the ability to group and ungroup are extremely important. Combine certainly has its importance depending on what the project may call for. Always when working with text, you have to use the combine tool.